Hi, welcome back to my channel. In the previous video I have presented the first 10 days of the Ukrainians' offensive in the Russian Kursk region. In this part I will present the fierce battles happened in late August, early September at the southwestern flank of the salient, in the so-called Glushkovo-rectangle. In this video I will make some statements which I have described in my previous video and I will not describe them again here. Furthermore, I will continue the analysis right where my previous video had been terminated, so I highly recommend to watch it before you continue. The link of it is in the description. The first battle for Korenyevo, marked as Objective Kilo, took place on the 15th of August. Here, a battalion of the Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade attempted to capture the town. They tried to envelop the defenders from the right while trying to push them out from the front. But this attack was repelled by a mixture of forces of Russian VDV, Marine and Air Force personnel, totally a size of a battalion. In the center of the Ukrainian salient, the 80th Air Assault Brigade also faced stiffening Russian resistance. However, they could effectively destroy the piecemeal-style attacks of the incoming Russian reinforcements. They could not expand the controlled area either. On the right flank, the long Ukrainian lines were mainly held by a battalion of the 22nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade, however additional reinforcements were required. According to open sources, some subunits of the 88th Air Assault Brigade and the 92nd Air Assault Brigade were present in the area. Facing them was a battalion of the 810th Marine Brigade, the 488th Guard Motorized Rifle Regiment, and the 272nd Motor Rifle Regiment. By mid-August, it was clear that the Ukrainians cannot expand their salient significantly. At least it seemed for the first time. However, if we have a closer look on the terrain, we can discover a great opportunity. I cannot highlight it enough. Terrain always fundamentally defines tactical land forces operations. On the bottom left flank of the Ukrainian salient, there was a complex terrain feature which drew the attention of the Ukrainian staff officers just like the flowers draw the honeybees. This area was bordered by the Ukrainians from three sides and by the river Seym from the northern side. This area is called the Glushkovo-rectangle. Nomen est omen, the number one terrain feature is the town of Glushkovo itself. It controls the roads and an important bridge over the river Seym. The town of Tyotkino is also an important terrain feature that can serve as a bastion of the defender, but it can also turn into a trap if enveloped. Other key elements of the terrain are the bridges over the river Seym and the choke point on the road leading to Korenyevo north from the village of Snagost. It was reasonable for the Ukrainians trying to capture this area, hence if it is done, it can be easily defended and can be used as a bargaining chip later. But this is the topic of politics which I try to avoid. What is more important, that both warring parties were aware of the importance of the Glushkovo rectangle and they were also aware of the features of the terrain in terms of objectives, avenues of approach, key terrain, obstacles, and cover and concealment. After the failed attack of Korenyevo, somewhere around the 20th of August, the Ukrainians executed a rotation and deployed the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade in order to clear the area until the main road south of the bridge marked as Objective Charlie and Snagost marked as Objective Sierra. Parallel with that, they also deployed the 225th Mechanized Infantry Battalion to capture Objective Charlie and Sierra. Of course, the Russians did not just sit and wait. They already had some subunits of the border guards, but they badly needed reinforcements, hence they were no match for an eventual Ukrainian offensive. The Russians also started to deploy elements of the 155th Separate Guard Naval Infantry Brigade. The brigade arrived in platoons and companies into the Glushkovo rectangle through the bridges marked as Objective Alpha and Bravo and the one at Glushkovo marked as Objective Golf. By the 20th of August, the Ukrainians managed to clear the road south of Objective Charlie, and they also managed to capture Objective Charlie and Sierra itself, thus sealing the rectangle from the east. In the same time, they executed HIMARS strikes and seldomly seen airstrikes against the bridges, thus making them unfit for use. The Russians, of course, reacted to these strikes. They were always good in constructing pontoon bridges. These pontoon bridge sets, called as PMP, has an interesting feature. They can be sunk some centimeters below the water level, so they are still perfectly usable, but they are more difficult to reconnoiter. In spite of that, these bridges were continuously destroyed and rebuilt during the month of August. But courtesy to the Russian engineer troops, they were always able to provide enough supplies and send reinforcements into the Glushkovo-rectangle. Parallel with the sealing of the Glushkovo-rectangle by the successful capture of Objective Charlie and Sierra on the 15th of August, the Ukrainians also sent a company of special forces and they seized the area north of Tyotkino between the Seine River and the state border. By the end of the 16th of August, it was clear for the Russians that if they go on like this, they will lose the Glushkovo-rectangle. Of course, they continued rebuilding their destroyed pontoon bridges, which helped them to supply the ever-growing number of incoming reinforcements. Hats off to the Russian combat engineer units. However, they well knew that it is not enough. They had to break the seal. The best way to do so was to recapture objectives Charlie and Sierra. The key areas for the firm control of these objectives were the villages of Komarovka, marked as Objective Kestrel, and the very small village of Apanasovka, marked as Objective Artemis. The Ukrainians were also well aware of the importance of these villages. They acted quickly, and on the 21st of August they deployed a company of the 225th Mechanized Infantry Battalion and captured Objective Artemis. They met with stubborn resistance. The Russians attacked them with FPV drones, however they employed effective electronic warfare countermeasures and they could capture the village by the end of the day. What caused them more trouble that the Russians could deploy a platoon of the 155th Marines and a platoon of the newly arrived 51st VDV Regiment and they launched a counterattack against the Ukrainians. The battle was raging on throughout the whole 22nd of August, but by the end of that day, the Ukrainians firmly controlled Objective Artemis. The Ukrainians had to continue attacking if they wanted to retain the initiative. Sources are not so clear, but what we know is that the battle was raging on for another week. And what we still know is that on the 2nd of September, Objective Kestrel was held by elements of the Ukrainian 225th Mechanized Infantry Battalion. According to my deduction based on this, I assume that the warring parties deployed drones and launched a series of small-scale attacks and counterattacks for the capture of Objective Kestrel. I assume that the Ukrainian 225th Battalion had to deploy at least one company between the 23rd and 26th of August, but they suffered heavy casualties from the continuous Russian counterattacks. According to open sources, both parties lost at least a company in these 4 days. However, I assume that somewhere around the 27th or 28th of August, the Ukrainians have managed to temporarily destroy the pontoon bridges in the area, thus cutting the avenues of approach for the Russian counterattacks from the north. By this, they managed to create a local superiority in numbers, defeat the subsequent counterattacks of the 155th Marines, and capture Objective Kestrel. On their left flank, the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade also executed a small attack as a shaping operation. Of course, this is just a deduction based on open sources and the terrain. Later research by historians can disprove this. But what is clear that from the 2nd of September until the 6th of September, this section of the front was relatively silent. Indeed, it was relatively silent because the Ukrainians ran out of steam and the Russians required time to plan and prepare. They reconstructed the pontoon bridges and concentrated at least 3 battalions worth of forces. A battalion of the 155th Marines was around the village of Kulbaki. A battalion of the 200th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade was north of them, and they also managed to deploy a company of the 51st Guards VDV Regiment around Komarovka. This clearly presents us by the first days of September the Ukrainians could not destroy for a long enough time the Russian pontoon bridges, so they could not choke the Russians by these choke points. The Russians commenced their attack by a 3 days long of drone and artillery preparation from the 6th of September. They continued this until the end of the 9th. These drones thoroughly reconnoitered the Ukrainian defenses and of course carried out effective strikes against important targets. On the 10th of September they launched the ground offensive. The 155th Marines and the Battalion of the Arctic Brigade executed platoon-scale frontal assaults against the lines of the Ukrainian 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade. They were successful and pushed back the Ukrainians by the size of a company battle position. They repeated the same on the 11th of September, which prompted the intervention of the adjacent 225th Mechanized Infantry Battalion. They attacked the left flank of the Russian forces, causing a platoon worth of casualties, but they could not stop the Russians defeating the Territorial Defense Brigade. The Russians had anticipated this Ukrainian maneuver and they launched their own decisive flanking attack. A mechanized infantry company of the 51st Guards VDV Regiment attacked from the north, broke into the rear of the Ukrainians and forced them to withdraw towards objective Artemis. By the end of the 12th, the Russians reached the line of objective Sierra, Charlie, Artemis and the village of Gordievka, thus breaking the seal on the Glushkovo-rectangle. On the 11th of September, other important events also had happened. As I mentioned, before the previously described Russian attack, the Glushkovo-rectangle was practically a cauldron with very limited supply capacities. According to military logic, cauldrons like this should be cut into pieces, and the Ukrainians planned accordingly. They redeployed 3 battalions in the area of Wolfine and Pavlivka. Their intention was to attack towards Glushkovo, thus cutting the Russians into 2 and creating favorable conditions to mop up their resistance later. Albeit the Russian attack changed the situation, it was still reasonable to launch this attack in order to threaten the back of the attacking Russian forces and to retain the initiative. The Ukrainians deployed the 425th Separate Assault Battalion, which penetrated the lightly defended state border, captured the border guard checkpoint, broke through and subsequently captured Vesaloye by the end of the 11th. This Ukrainian attack caused serious problems for the Russians. They had enough forces in the Glushkovo-rectangle to attack towards objective Artemis, but now they had to continue their own attack and in the same time contain the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians knew that speed is still of great importance, and they tried to advance as far as they could towards objective Golf. The Ukrainians deployed a battalion of the 22nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade, which have been recently redeployed from the northern edge of the Kursk salient. This battalion reached the line presented by the end of the 12th of September, but they could not achieve more. And it has 3 reasons. 1. It is a big enough territory to capture for 2 battalions. 2. The Russians launched their own counterattacks with their reserves. 3. I assume that this Ukrainian battalion of the 22nd was not at full strength because of previous battles. On the next day, the Ukrainians reached a decision point. They could not attack towards Glushkovo because of the incoming Russian reinforcements, for example, elements of the 76th Guard Era South Division, but they still had an option to effectively threaten the Russians attacking towards east near objective Artemis. So they chose this option and deployed a battalion of the 95th Era South Brigade. They launched a shaping attack to the north in order to cover their left flank, and in coordination with that, they attacked towards the back of the Russian 155th Marines near Kulbaki. According to my calculations, this main attack could not have been carried out by more than 2 companies, therefore it is no surprise that they were stopped by the counterattacks of the Russian Marines and Arctic infantry. With the culmination of this battle, it was clear that the Ukrainians neither have enough force to destroy the Russians in the Glushkovo-rectangle, nor further expand their controlled area in the Russian Kursk region. In the same time, the Russian attacks towards Pokrovsk and Vuhledar were in full swing, therefore the Russians could not send more troops here if they wanted to press on in the Donbass. It meant that however the Ukrainians achieved some significant tactical victories, this Ukrainian offensive could not achieve the goal of retaining the strategic initiative. All of this had led to a stalemate. As in case of all stalemates in a war, the warring parties instantly tried to solve them according to their favor. The Ukrainians still had the advantage in better leadership at the tactical level. However, the Russians slowly but surely gathered enough forces to be able to effectively contain the Ukrainian maneuvers. This could result that they could more effectively exploit their numerical superiority and their advantage in terms of firepower. In the next and final part of this series, I will present and analyze the Russian counterattacks against the Ukrainian salient. So if you don't wanna miss it, it is highly recommended to subscribe. Furthermore, if you think my job worth it, please give it a like, and if you have anything to add, I am more than happy to see it in the comments. Thank you and see you soon.